And hello. Yes, boom microphone is actually working, so hopefully you should be able to hear me. Sorry, I'm little bit late in getting started, but we are now ready to continue with P.G. Woodhouse's Love Among the Chickens. As always, please remember this book was written in 1906. Oh, good. Thank you, Magpie, and hello again. Long time no see. Uh, um, this book was written in 1906, so please be prepared for period typical attitudes toward basically anyone who is not a cis white English male. Um, but otherwise, it should be reasonably harmless, more or less. One thinks, one hopes. When we last left off, our intrepid protagonist, at least, had recently discovered that his plan to win over the father of his beloved by arranging for the father to be dumped into the ocean so the protagonist could rush in and save him had been revealed as a dastardly plot. So we are now going to deal with the consequences of that. There are 8 chapters remaining. Hopefully, I don't know. It sort of depends on how quickly things go, whether we will actually finish this or leave off again after 5 chapters. Tilly votes for leaving off after 5. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, dear. That's okay. I thought I felt a cold nose on my leg. So that would be the Tilly saying hello. Yes, you have made your point, sweetie. Thank you. Good girl. Okay, so on to the story. Chapter 16. A chance a chance meeting. I roamed the place in search of the varlet for the space of half an hour, and after having drawn all his familiar haunts, found him at length leaning over the sea wall near the church, gazing thoughtfully into the water's blur. I confronted him. "Well," I said, "you're a beauty, aren't you?" He eyed me owlishly. Even at this early hour, I was grieved to see he showed signs of having looked on the bitter while it was brown. His eyes were filmy, his manner aggressively solemn. "Beauty?" he echoed. "What have you got to say for yourself?" "Say for self." It was plain that he was engaged in pulling his faculties together by some laborious process known only to himself. At present, my words conveyed no meaning to him. He was trying to identify me. He had seen me somewhere before, he was certain, but he could not say where or who I was. "I want to know," I said, "what induced you to be such an abject idiot as to let our arrangement get known?" Yes, indeed, that was a stupid thing, wasn't it? It was not a wise decision. Um, I spoke quietly. I was not going to waste the choicer flowers of speech on a man who was incapable of understanding them. Later on, when he had awakened to a sense of his position, I would begin to really talk to him. He continued to stare at me. Then a sudden flush of intelligence lit up his features. "Mr. Gardick," he said at last, "from Chicken Farm," he continued, with the triumphant air of a cross-examining king's counsel who has at last got on track. "Yes," I said. "Up top the hill," he proceeded, clenchingly. He stretched out a huge hand. "How are you?" he inquired with a friendly grin. "I want to know," I said distinctly, "what you've got to say for yourself after letting our affair with the professor become public property." He paused a while in thought. "Dear sir," he said at last, as if he were dictating a letter. "Dear sir, I owe you ex... ex... He waved his hand, as if to say, as who should say, "It's a stiff job, but I'm going to do it." "Explanation," he said. "You do?" said I grimly. "I should like to hear it." "Dear sir, listen me." "Go on, then." You came me. You said, walk over and listen to me. You don't tip, you tip this old bufflehead in water, you said. And gormed if I don't give you a pound note. That's what you said to me. Oh, sorry, that's what you said me. Isn't that what you said me? I did not deny it. Very well, I said you. Right, I said. Tilly, sweetie, you are ruining the atmosphere. Thank you very much, dear. Okay, apparently the solution is to rub Tilly with one foot and read facing like this. Okay, sorry. Let's see, I did not deny it. Very well, I said you. Right, I said. I tipped the old soul into water. I got the pound note. Yes, you took care of that. All of that. All this is quite true, but it's beside the point. We are not disputing about what happened. What I want to know, for the third time, is what made you let the cat out of the bag? Why couldn't you keep quiet about it? He waved his hand. Dear sir, he replied, this way, listen me. It was a tragic story that he unfolded. My wrath ebbed as I listened. After all, the fellow was not so greatly to blame. I felt that in his place I should have acted as he had done. It was fate's fault, and fate's alone. It appeared that he had not come well out of the matter of the accident. I had not looked at it hitherto from his point of view. While the rescue had left me the popular hero, it did quite the opposite result for him. He had upset his boat and would have drowned his passenger, said public opinion, if the young hero from London, myself, had not plunged in, and at the risk of his life brought the professor ashore. Consequently, he was despised by all as an inefficient boatman. He became a laughing-stock. The local wags made laborious jests when he passed. They offered him fabulous sums to take their worst enemies out for a row with him. They wanted to know when he was going to school to learn his business. In fact, they behaved as wags do, and always have done, as at all times, all the world over. Now, all this, it seemed, Mr. Hawke would have borne cheerfully and patiently for my sake, or at any rate for the sake of the crisp pound note I had given him. But a fresh factor appeared in the problem, complicating it grievously. To wit, Miss Jane Muskrat. She said to me, explained Mr. Hawke with pathos, Harry Hawke, you me good fool, and I don't marry noon is to be trusted in a boat by myself. That is ain't to be trusted. Gosh, that's difficult. Okay. We're going to take another run up at that sentence. Harry Hawke, she said, you me good fool, and I don't marry noon as is ain't to be trusted in a boat by hisself, and as jokes made about him by that Tom Lee. A punch, Tom Lee, observed Mr. Hawke parenthetically. So, she said to me, you can go away, and I don't want to see you again. This heartless conduct on the part of Miss Muskrat had had the natural result of making him confess in self-defence, and she had written to the professor the same night. I forgave Mr. Hawke. I think he was hardly sober enough to understand, for he betrayed no emotion. It is fate, Hawke, I said, simply fate. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will, and it's no good grumbling. Yes, said Mr. Hawke, after chewing the sentiment for a while in silence. So she said me, Hawke, she said, like that, you're a good fool. That's all right, I replied. I quite understand. As I say, it's simply fate. Goodbye. And I left him. As I was going back, I met the professor and Phyllis. They passed me without a look. I wandered on in quite a fervour of self-pity. I was in one of those moods when life suddenly seems to become irksome, when the future stretches black and grey in front of one. I should have liked to have faded almost imperceptibly from the world, like Mr. Bardell, even if, as in his case, it had involved being knocked on the head with a pint pot in a public house cellar. In such a mood, it is imperative that one should seek distraction. The shining example of Mr. Harry Hawke did not lure me. Taking to drink would be a nuisance. Work was what I wanted. I should toil like a navvy all day among the fowls, separating them when they fought, gathering in the eggs when they laid, chasing them across country when they got away, and even, if necessity arose, painting their throats with turpentine when they were stricken with roup. Then, after dinner, when the lamps were lit, and Mrs. Uckridge nursed Edwin and sewed, and Uckridge smoked cigars and incited the gramophone to murder mumbling mows, I would steal away to my bedroom and write, and write, and write, and go on writing till my fingers were numb and my eyes refused to do their duty. And, when time had passed, I might come to feel that it was all for the best. A man must go through the fire before he can write his masterpiece. We learn in suffering what we teach in song. What we lose on the swings we make up on the roundabouts. Jerry Garnet, the man, might be a depressed, hopeless wreck, with the iron planted immovably in his soul. But Jeremy Garnet, the author, should turn out such a novel of gloom that strong critics would weep, and the public jostle for copies till Moody's doorway became a shambles. Thus might I some day feel that all this anguish was really a blessing, effectively disguised. But I doubted it. We were none of us very cheerful now at the farm. Even Uckridge's spirit was little daunted by the bills which poured in by every post. It was as if the tradesmen of the neighbourhood had formed a league and were working in concert. Or it may have been due to thought waves. Little accounts came not in for single spies, or it came not in. Going to redo that sentence and actually going to hydrate. Just a moment. Goodness, that was quite a bonk. Okay. Little accounts came not in single spies, but in battalions. The popular demand for the sight of the colour of his money grew daily. Every morning at breakfast he would give us fresh bulletins of the state of mind of each of our creditors, and thrill us with the announcement that Whitley's were getting cross, and Harrod's jumpy, or that the bearings of Dawlish, the grocer, were becoming overheated. We lived in a continual atmosphere of worry. Chicken and nothing but chicken at meals, and chicken and nothing but chicken between meals, had frayed our nerves. Yes, indeed, Tilly. Munchkin. Thank you. Yes, I get it. Thank you. It's okay. Good girl. So sorry about that. And, let's see, it frayed our nerves. And we have a Tilly who is fraying our nerves. Yes. Yes, indeed you are. You need to knock it the fuck off, dear, okay? Yes, you do. You really do. Tilly. Tilly, sweetie. Okay, Tilly. Hey, boo. Thank you. Good girl. It's okay. You need to knock it off, though. You really do. Thank you. Okay, we're going to try this again. Frayed our nerves. An air of defeat hung over the place. We were a beaten side, and we realized it. We had been playing an uphill game for nearly 2 months, and the strain was beginning to tell. Uckridge became uncannily silent. Mrs. Uckridge, though she did not understand, I fancy, the details of the matter, was worried because Uckridge was. Mrs. Beale had long since been turned into a soured cynic by the lack of chances vouchsafed her for the exercise of her art. And as for me, I have never since spent so profoundly miserable a week. I was not even permitted the anodyne of work. There seemed to be nothing to do on the farm. The chickens were quite happy, and only asked to be let alone and allowed to have their meals at regular intervals. And every day, one or more of their number would vanish into the kitchen. Mrs. Beale would serve up the corpse in some cunning disguise, and we would try to delude ourselves into the idea that it was something altogether different. There was one solitary gleam of variety in our menu. An editor sent me a check for a set of verses. We cashed that check, and it trooped round the town in a body, laying out the money. We bought a leg of mutton, and a tongue, and sardines, and pineapple chunks, and potted meat, and many other noble things, and had a perfect banquet. Mrs. Beale, with the scenario of a smile on her face, the first that she had worn in these days of stress, brought in the joint and uncovered it with an air. "Thank God," said Uckridge as he began to carve. It was the first time I'd ever heard him say a grace, and if ever an occasion merited such deviation from habit, this occasion did. After that we relapsed into routine again. Deprived of physical labor, with the exception of golf and bathing, trivial sports compared with work at the fowl run and at its hardest, I tried to make up for it by working at my novel. It refused to materialize. The only progress I achieved was with my villain. I drew him from the professor and made him a blackmailer. He had several other social defects, but that was his profession. That was the thing he did really well. It was on one of the many occasions on which I had sat in my room, pen in hand, through the whole of a lovely afternoon, with no better results than a slight headache, that I bethought me of that little paradise on the Weir Cliff, hung over the sea and backed by green woods. I had not been there for some time, owing principally to an entirely erroneous idea that I could do more solid work sitting in a straight, hard chair at a table than lying on soft turf with the sea wind in my eyes. But now the desire to visit that little clearing again drove me from my room. In the drawing room below the gramophone, below. Okay, this is why I like more commas than a lot of people do. In the drawing room below, the gramophone was dealing brassily with Mr. Blackman. Outside, the sun was just thinking of setting. The Weir Cliff was the best medicine for me. What does Kipling say? Are you going to tell me? Okay. And and soon you will find that the sun and the wind and the gin of the garden too have lightened the hump, Camellia's hump, the hump that is black and blue. His instructions include digging with a hoe and a shovel also, but I could omit that. The sun and the wind were what I needed. I took the upper road. In certain moods I preferred it to the path along the cliff. I walked fast. The exercise was soothing. To reach my favorite clearing, I had to take to the fields on the left, and strike downhill in the direction of the sea. I hurried down the narrower path. I broke into the clearing at a jog trot and stood panting. And at the same moment, looking cool and beautiful in her white dress, Phyllis entered from the other side. Phyllis without the professor. Okay, so chapter 17, of a sentimental nature. She was wearing a Panama. She carried a sketching... Whoop! Hello, that's not the right thing to do. She was wearing a Panama, and she's carried a sketching block and a camp stool. Good evening, I said. Good evening, said she. It is curious how different the same words can sound when spoken by different people. My good evening might have been that of a man with a particularly guilty conscience, caught in the act of doing something more than usually ignoble. She spoke like a rather offended angel. It's a lovely evening, went on pluckily. Very. The sunset? Yes. She raised a pair of blue eyes, devoid of all expression save a faint suggestion of surprise, and gazed through me for a moment at some object a couple of thousand miles away, and lowered click there, lowered them again, leaving me with a vague feeling that there was something wrong with my personal appearance. Very calmly, she moved to the edge of the cliff, arranged her camp stool, and sat down. Neither of us spoke a word. I watched her while she filled a little mug with water from a little bottle, opened a paint box, selected a brush, and placed her sketching block in position. She began to paint. Now, by all the laws of good taste, I should before this have made a dignified exit. It was plain that I was not to be regarded as an essential ornament of this portion of the Weir Cliff. By now, if I had been the perfect gentleman, I ought to have been a quarter-mile away. But there is a definite limit to what a man can do. I remained. The sinking sun flung a carpet of gold across the sea. Phyllis's hair was tinged with it. Little waves tumbled lazily on the beach below, except for the song of a distant blackbird running through its repertoire before retiring for the night. Everything was silent. She sat there, dipping and painting and dipping again, with never a word for me, standing patiently and humbly behind her. "Miss Derrick?" I said. She half turned her head. "Yes." "Why won't you speak to me?" I said. "I don't understand you." "Why won't you speak to me?" "I think you know, Mr. Garnet." "It is because of that boat accident." "Accident?" "Episode," I amended. She went on painting in silence. From where I stood, I could see her profile. Her chin was tilted. Her expression was determined. "Is it?" I said. "Need we discuss it?" "Not if you do not wish it." I paused. "But," I added, "I should have liked a chance to defend myself. What glorious sunsets there have been in these last few days. I believe we shall have this sort of weather for another month." I should not have thought that possible. "The glass is going up," I said. "I was not talking about the weather." It was dull of me to introduce such a worn-out topic. "You said you could defend yourself." "I said I should like the chance to do so." "You have it." "That's very kind of you. Thank you. Is there any reason for gratitude?" "Every reason." "Go on, Mr. Garnet. I can listen while I paint. But please sit down. I don't like being talked to from a height." I sat down on the grass in front of her, feeling as I did so that the change of position, in a manner, clipped my wings. It is difficult to speak movingly while sitting on the ground. Instinctively, I avoided eloquence. Standing up, I might have been pathetic and pleading. Sitting down, I was compelled to be matter-of-fact. "You remember, of course, the night you and Professor Derrick dined with us?" When I say dined, I use the word in a loose sense. For a moment I thought she was going to smile. We were both thinking of Edwin, but it was only for a moment. And then her face grew cold once more, and the chin resumed its angle of determination. "Yes," she said. "You remember the unfortunate ending of the festivities?" "Well?" "If you recall that at all clearly, you will also remember that the fault was not mine, but Uckridge's." "Well?" "It was his behaviour that annoyed Professor Derrick. The position, then, was this, that I was to be cut off from the pleasantest friendship I'd ever formed." I stopped for a moment. She bent her head. She bent a little lower over her easel, but remained silent, simply through the tactlessness of a prize idiot. "I like Mr. Uckridge. I like him too, but I can't pretend that he's anything but an idiot at times. Well, I naturally wished to mend matters. It occurred to me that An excellent way of doing an excellent way would be by doing your father a service. It was seeing him fishing that put the idea of a boat accident into my head. I hoped for a genuine boat accident, but those things only happen when one does not want them. So I determined to engineer one. You didn't think of the shock to my father. I did. It worried me very much, but you upset him all the same. Reluctantly, she looked up, and our eyes met. I could detect no trace of forgiveness in hers. You behaved abominably. Oh, hi, Ned. Hi, I am doing well, thanks. How are you? Long time no see. We are just continuing on with the misadventures of Jerry Garnett or Garnett. Can't remember how I'm pronouncing it. But we are um, we're confronting his beloved at the moment, and it's not going terribly well. So, let's see. Where was I? You didn't. Okay, reluctantly. Sorry, I just resized the window a bit so I could see chat. Uh, and now everything has repaged. So, okay. You upset him all the same. Reluctantly. She looked up and our eyes met. I could detect no trace of forgiveness in hers. You behaved abominably, she said. I played a risky game and I lost. I shall now take the consequences. With luck, I should have won. I did not have luck, and I'm not going to grumble about it. But I am grateful to you for letting me explain. Should not have liked you to have gone on thinking that I played practical jokes on my friends. That's all I have to say. I think it was kind of you to listen. Goodbye, Miss Derrick. I got up. Are you going? Why not? Please sit down again. But you wish to be alone. Please sit down. There was a flush on the cheek turned to me, and the chin was tilted higher. I sat down. To the westward, the sky had changed to the hue of a bruised cherry. The sun had sunk below the horizon, and the sea looked cold and leaden. The blackbird had long since flown. I am glad you told me, Mr. Garnet. She dipped her brush in the water. Because I don't like to think badly of people. She bent her head over the painting. Though I still think you behaved very wrongly. And I am afraid my father will never forgive you for what you did. Her father? As if he counted. I, okay, there we go. But you do? But you do? I said eagerly. I think you were less to blame than I thought you were at first. No more than that. You can't expect to escape all consequences. You did a very stupid thing. I was tempted. The sky was a dull grey now. It was growing dusk. The grass on which I sat was wet with dew. I stood up. Isn't it getting a little dark for painting? I said. Are you sure you won't catch cold? It's very damp. Perhaps it is. And it is late, too. She shut her paint box and emptied the little mug onto the grass. May I carry your things? I said. I think she hesitated, but only for a moment. I possessed myself of the camp stool, and we started on our homeward journey. We were both silent. The spell of the quiet summer evening was on us. And okay, and all the air solemn stillness holds. Oh, that was the wrong voice. Not that you can really probably tell, but okay. And all the air a solemn stillness holds, she said softly. I love this cliff, Mr. Garnet. It's the most soothing place in the world. I found it so this evening. She glanced at me quickly. You're not looking well, she said. Are you sure you are not overworking yourself? No, it's not that. Somehow we had stopped, as if by agreement, and were facing each other. There was a look in her eyes I had never seen there before. The twilight hung like a curtain between us and the world. We were alone together in a world of our own. It is because I had offended you, I said. She laughed a high, unnatural laugh. I have loved you ever since I first saw you, I said doggedly. Oh dear. Yeah, that's okay. Well, yes, we have to move the plot along, I suppose, but yeah, can can never really get over the sensation that declarations of love and engagements in Woodhouse happen really super quickly. Uh, But moving on, chapter 18. Uckridge gives me advice. Oh, that's not a good thing. Hours after, or so it seemed to me, we reached the spot at which our ways divided. We stopped, and I felt as if I had been suddenly cast back into the workaday world from some distant, pleasanter planet. I think Phyllis must have felt much the same sensation, for we both became, on the instant, intensely practical and businesslike. But about your father, I said. That's the difficulty. He won't give us his consent. I'm afraid he wouldn't dream of it. You can't persuade him. I can in most things, but not in this. You see, even if nothing had happened, he wouldn't like to lose me just yet, because of Nora. Nora? My sister. She's going to be married in October. I wonder if we shall ever be as happy as they will. Happy? They will be miserable compared with us. Not that I know who the man is. Why, Tom, of course. Do you mean to say you really didn't know? Tom? Tom Chase? Of course. I gasped. Well, I'm hanged, I said, when I think of all the torments I've been through because of that wretched man. All for nothing. I don't know what to say. Don't you like Tom? Very much. I always did. But I was awfully jealous of him. You weren't. How silly of you. Of course I was. It was always about with you. I called you Phyllis and generally behaved as if you and he were the heroine and hero of a musical comedy. So what else could I think? I heard you singing duets after dinner once. I drew the worst conclusions. When was that? What were you doing there? It was shortly after Uckridge had got on your father's nerves and nipped our acquaintance in the bud. I used to come every night to the hedge opposite your drawing-room window and brood there by the hour, because that's not creepy at all. By modern standards, very creepy. 1906 standards, apparently not, because Phyllis says, oh, poor old boy, hoping to hear you sing. And when you did sing, and he joined in all flat, I used to swear. I'd probably find most of the bark scorched off the tree I leaned against. Poor old man. Still, it's all over now, isn't it? And when I was doing my very best to show off before you at tennis, you went away just before I got into form. Oh, hello, Alex. Hi, thank you for joining us. And we are hopefully, maybe, going to wrap up this story before the end of the evening. We're not sure. Yes, confessing to creepiness sooner than is better than rather than later, definitely. But yes, let's see. I'm very sorry, but I couldn't know, could I? I thought you always played like that. I know. I knew you would. Nearly turned my hair white. I didn't see how a girl could ever care for a man who was so bad at tennis. One doesn't love a man because he's good at tennis. What does a girl love to see in a man? I inquired abruptly, paused on the verge of a great discovery. Oh, I don't know, she replied, most unsatisfactorily. And I could draw no views from her. But about father, said she. What are we to do? He objects to me. He's perfectly furious with you. Blow, blow, I said, thou winter wind, thou are not so unkind. He'll never forgive you, as man's ingratitude. I saved his life, at the risk of my own, and why, I believe I've got a legal claim on him. Who ever heard of a man having his life saved, and not being delighted when his preserver wanted to marry his daughter? Your father is striking at the very root of the short story writer's little earnings. He mustn't be allowed to do it. Jerry, I started. Again? I said. What? Say it again. Do, please. Now? Very well. Jerry. It was the first time you had called me by my Christian name. I didn't suppose you've the remotest notion how splendid it sounds when you say it. There's something poetical, almost holy about it. Jerry, please. Say on. Do be sensible. Don't you see how serious this is? We must think how we can make father consent. All right, I said. We'll tackle the point. I'm sorry to be frivolous, but I'm so happy I can't keep it all in. I've got you, and I can't think of anything else. Try. I'll pull myself together. Now, say on once more. We can't marry without his consent. Why not? I said, not having marked respect for the professor's whims. Gretna Green is out of date, but there are registrars. I hate the very idea of a registrar, she said with decision. Besides, well, poor father would never get over it. We've always been such friends. If I married against his wishes, he would, you know, not let me near him again, not write to me. He would hate it all the time he was doing it. He'd be bored to death without me. Who wouldn't? I said. Because, you see, Nora has never been quite the same. She spent such a lot of her time on visits to people that she and father don't understand each other so well as he and I do. She would try and be nice to him, but she wouldn't know him as I do. And besides, she will be with him such a little now that she's going to be married. But look here, I said, this is absurd. You say your father would never see you again and so on if you married me. Why? It's nonsense. It isn't as if I was we're a sort of social outcast. We were the best of friends till that man Hawke gave me away. I know, but he's very obstinate about some things. You see, he thinks the whole thing has made him look ridiculous, and it will take him a long time to forgive you for that. Oh, I think I know where the next plot is going. 1906, father's consent is the one that gets the most page time. Yes, 1906, it was apparently very important. But I like that the protagonist is like, let's just elope. And then also takes no for an answer. Let's see, I realize the truth of this. One can pardon an injury to oneself, unless it hurts one's vanity. Moreover, even in a genuine case of rescue, the rescued man must always feel a little aggrieved with his rescuer when he thinks the matter over in cold blood. He must regard him unconsciously as the super regards the actor-manager, indebted to him for the means of supporting existence, but grudging him the limelight, the centre of the stage, and the applause. Besides, everyone instinctively dislikes being under an obligation which they can never wholly repay, and when a man discovers that he has experienced all these mixed sensations for nothing, as the professor had done, his wrath is likely to be no such slight thing. A headband? It is elven headband. Yes, it kind of is. Was not sold as such, but it doesn't have the ear thing. But yes, I like to wear some sort of odd headgear before streaming to sort of give me a more Oh, thank you, Alex. That's so nice of you to say. I appreciate that. Um, but yes, I like to wear some sort of headgear to give me a little bit more confidence uh, on camera. Doesn't always work, but it's worth a shot at least. And returning to the story, taking everything into consideration, I could not but feel that it would require more than a little persuasion to make the professor bestow his blessing with that genial warmth which we like to see in our fathers-in-laws elect. You don't think, I said, that time, the great healer, and so on, you won't feel kindlier disposed to me, say, in a month's time? Of course he might, said Phyllis, but she spoke doubtfully. And okay, and let's see. He strikes me, from what I have seen of him, as a man of moods. I might do something one of these days which would completely alter his views. I will hope for the best. About telling father, need we, do you think? I said. Yes, we must. I couldn't bear to think that I was keeping it from him. I don't think I've ever kept anything from him in my life. Nothing bad, I mean. You count this among your darker crimes, then? I, I was looking at it from my father's point of view. He will be awfully angry. I don't know how I shall begin telling him. Good heavens, I cried. You surely don't think I'm going to let you do that. Keep safely out of the way while you tell him. Not much. Oh, sorry. Oh, I misread that sentence. Keep safely out of the way while you tell him. Not much. I'm coming back with you now, and we'll break the bad news together. No, not tonight. He may be tired and rather cross. We'd better wait till tomorrow. You might speak with him in the morning. Where shall I find him? He is certain to go to the beach before breakfast for a swim. Good. I'll be there. Thank you, Tillyhead. Okay. Uckridge, I said, when I got back, I want your advice. It stirred him like a trumpet blast. I suppose when a man is in the habit of giving unsolicited counsel to everyone he meets, it is as invigorating as an electric shock to him to be asked for it spontaneously. Bring it out, laddie, he replied cordially. I'm with you. Here, come along into the garden. State your case. This suited me. It's always easier to talk intimately in the dark, and I did not wish to be interrupted by the sudden entrance of the hired man or Mrs. Beale, of which there was always a danger indoors. We walked down to the paddock. Uckridge lit a cigar. Uckridge, I said, I'm engaged. What? A huge hand whistled through the darkness and smote me heavily between the shoulder blades. By Jove, old boy, I wish you luck. Upon my Sam, I do. Best thing in the world for you. Bachelors are mere excrescences. Never knew what happiness was till I married. When's the wedding to be? That's where I want your advice. What you might call a difficulty has arisen about the wedding. It's like this. I'm engaged to Phyllis Derrick. Derrick? Derrick? You can't have forgotten her. Good Lord, what eyes some men have. Why, if I'd only seen her once, I should have remembered her all my life. I know now. Rather a pretty girl, with blue eyes. Stared at him blankly. It was not much good, as he could not see my face, but it relieved me. Rather a pretty girl. What a description. Of course, yes, continued Uckridge. She came to dinner here one night with her father, that fat little buffer. As you were careful to call him to his face at the time, confound you, that was what started all the trouble. Trouble? What trouble? Why, her father. By Jove, I remember now. So worried lately, old boy, that my memory's gone groggy. Of course, her father fell into the sea and you fished him out. Why, dammy. Dammy or damn? I'm just going to say, why, damn. It's like the stories you read. It's also very like the stories I used to write. But they had one point about them which this story hasn't. They invariably ended happily, with the father joining the heroes and heroine's hands and giving his blessing. Unfortunately, in the present case, that doesn't seem likely to happen. The old man won't give his consent? I'm afraid not. I haven't asked him yet, but the chances are against it. But why? What's the matter with you? You're an excellent chap, sound in wind and limb, and didn't you tell me once tell me that if you married, you came into a pretty sizable bit of money? Yes, I do. That part of it's all right. Uckridge's voice betrayed perplexity. I don't understand this thing, old horse, he said. I should have thought the old boy would have been all over you. My damn, I've never heard anything like it. You saved his life. You fished him out of the water. After chucking him in. That's the trouble. You chucked him in? By proxy. I explained. Uckridge, I regret to say, laughed in a way that must have been heard miles away in distant villages in Devonshire. You devil! he bellowed. On my Sam, old horse. Look at you, one would never have thought you'd have had it in you. Can't help looking respectable. What are you going to do about it? That's where I wanted your advice. You're a man of resource. What would you do in my place? Uckridge tapped me impressively on the shoulder. Laddie, he said, there's one thing that'll carry you through any mess. And that is? Cheek, my old boy, cheek. Gall, nerve. But take my case. I never told you how I came to marry, did I? I thought not. Well, it was this way. It'll do you a bit of good, perhaps, to hear the story, for mark you, blessings weren't going cheap in my case, either. You know Millie's Aunt Elizabeth, the female who wrote that letter? Well, when I tell you that she was Millie's nearest relative, and that it was her consent I had to snaffle, you'll see that I was faced with a bit of a problem. Let's have it, I said. Well, the first time I ever saw Millie was in a first-class carriage on the Underground. I'd got a third-class ticket, by the way. The carriage was full, and I got up and gave her my seat, and as I hung suspended over her by a strap, damn, I fell in love with her, then and there. You've no conception, laddie, how indescribingly ripping she looked, in a sort of blue dress with a bit of red in it, and a hat with thingamies. Well, we both got out at South Kensington. By that time I was gasping for air, and saw that the thing wanted looking into. I've never had much time to bother about women, but I realized that this must not be missed. I was in love, old horse. It comes over you quite suddenly, like a tidal wave. I know! Good heavens, you can't tell me anything about that. Well, I followed her. She went to a house in Thurlow Square. I waited outside and thought it over. I had got to get into that shanty and make her acquaintance. If they threw me out on my ear. So I rang the bell. Is Lady Liginal at home? I asked. You spot the devilish cunning of the ruse, what? My asking for a female with a title was to make him think I was one of the upper 10. How are you dressed? I could not help asking. Oh, it was one of my frock coat days. Been to see a man about tutoring his son, and by a merciful dispensation of Providence, there was a fellow living in the same boarding house with me who was about my build and had a frock coat, and he lent it to me. Well, at least, he hadn't exactly lent it to me, but I knew where he kept it, and he was out at the time. There was nothing the matter with my appearance. Quite the young duke, I assure you, laddie, down to the last button. Is Lady Liginal at home? I asked. No, said the maid. Nobody of that name here. This is Lady Lakenheath's house. So, you see, I had a bit of luck at the start, because the names were a bit alike. Well, I got the maid to show me in somehow, and once in, you can bet I talked for all I was worth. Kept up a flow of conversation about being misdirected and coming to the wrong house, went away and called a few days later, gradually wormed my way in, called regularly, spied on their movements, God, these people. Okay, stalkers and home invaders. Okay. Uh, Spied on their movements, met him at every theatre they went to, and bowed, and finally got away with Millie before her aunt knew what was happening, or who I was, or what I was doing, or anything. And what's the moral? Why, go in like a mighty rushing wind. Bustle 'em. Don't give 'em a moment's rest, or time to think of anything. Why, if I'd given Millie's Aunt Elizabeth time to think, where should we have been? Not at Combe Regis together, I'll bet. You heard that letter, know what she thinks of me now, on reflection. If I'd gone slow and played a timid waiting game, she'd have thought that before I married Millie, instead of afterwards. I give you my honest word, laddie, that there was a time, towards the middle of our acquaintance, after she had stopped mixing me up with the man who came to wind the clocks, that when that woman ate out of my hand. Twice, on two separate occasions, she actually asked my advice about feeding her toy Pomeranian. Well, that shows you. Bustle 'em, laddie, bustle 'em. Uckridge, I said, you inspire me. You would inspire a caterpillar. I will go to the professor. I was going anyhow, but now I shall go aggressively. I will prize a father's blessing out of him if I have to do it with a crowbar. That's the way to talk, old horse. Don't beat about the bush. Tell him exactly what you want and stand no nonsense. If you don't see what you want in the window, ask for it. Where did you think of tackling him? Phyllis tells me that he always goes for a swim before breakfast. I thought of going down tomorrow and waylaying him. We couldn't do better. By Jove, said Uckridge suddenly, I'll tell you what I'll do, laddie. Wouldn't do it for everybody, but I look on you as a favourite son. I'll come with you and help break the ice. Oh, God. Okay, that's not going to go well. What? Don't you be under any delusion, old horse, said Uckridge paternally. You haven't got an easy job in front of you, and what you'll need more than anything else, when you really get down to brass tacks, is a wise, kindly man of the world at your elbow, to whoop you on when your nerve fails you, and generally stand in your corner and see that you get a fair show. But it's rather an intimate business. Never mind. Take my tip and have me at your side. I can say things about you that you would be too modest to say for yourself. I can plead your case, laddie. I can point out in detail all that the old boy will be missing if he gives you the missing baulk. Well, that's settled then. About 8 tomorrow morning. What? I'll be there, my boy. The swim will do me good. Oh, good heavens. Yes, it's a little distressing to hear pursuing a woman described like a con job. Yes. A Russian win. Yes. Yeah. Yes, yeah, we haven't got a wise man here. Oh good. Why, thank you so much for the lovely little thing. And are we going to actually be able to paste that in? There we go. Sorry, one moment, please. And boop, boop, boop. Oh, thank you. Um, thank you, Fuji. That is wonderful. Yeah, sorry, it just took a moment for me to remember that I'm working on my Mac. So using my PC keyboard is not going to let me copy and paste. So a little bit of keyboard confusion there. But well, glad to have you here, Fuji. Um, yeah. We don't have a wise man here, but we do have, well, we did at least briefly have a bot. Bot should be gone by now. Yay! Um, Continuing on to chapter 19, Asking Papa. Reviewing the matter later, I could see that I made one or two blunders in my conduct of the campaign to win over Professor Derrick. In the first place, I made a bad choice of time and place. At the moment, this did not strike me. It is a simple matter, I've reflected, for a man to pass another by haughtily and without recognition when they meet on dry land. But when the said man, being it should be remembered, an indifferent swimmer, is accosted in the water and out of his depth, the feat becomes a hard one. Seemed to me that I should have a better chance with the professor in the water than out of it. Oh, don't. No, meet him on the shore. Don't go into the water. Okay, yeah. My second mistake, and this was brought home to me almost immediately, was in bringing Uckridge along. Not that I really brought him along, it was rather a case of being unable to shake him off. When he met me on the gravel outside the house at 7:45 on the following morning, clad in a dingy mackintosh which, swinging open, revealed a purple bathing suit, I confess that my heart sank. Unfortunately, all my efforts to dissuade him from accompanying me were attributed by him to a pardonable nervousness, or, as he put it, to the needle. "Buck up, laddie," he roared encouragingly. I had anticipated this. Something seemed to tell me that your nerve would go when it came to the point. You're deuced lucky, old horse, to have a man like me at your side. Why, if you were alone, you wouldn't have a word to say for yourself. You'd just gape at the man and yammer. But I'm with you, laddie. I'm with you. If your flow of conversation dries up, count on me to keep the thing going. Yes, he already risked drowning him. Drowning him once. Water meeting will look sketchy at best. Yes, meet him at least on shore, at least 30 feet away from the actual water, but Woodhouse characters hardly ever, or their protagonists at least, hardly ever learn from experience. So, and so it came about that, having reached the cob, and spying in the distance the grey head of the professor bobbing about on the face of the waters, we dived in, oh God, and swam rapidly towards him. His face was turned in the opposite direction when we came up with him. Oh, no. He was floating peacefully on his back, and it was plain that he had not observed our approach. For when, treading water easily in his rear, I wished him good morning in my most conciliatory tone, he stood not upon the order of his sinking, but went under like so much pig iron. I waited courteously till he rose to the surface again, when I repeated my remark. He, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's just the utter absurdity of asking for someone's hand in marriage when you're swimming. Is it? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Brief digression there. He expelled the last remnant of water from his mouth with a wrathful splutter, and cleared his eyes with the back of his hand. I confess to a slight feeling of apprehension as I met his gaze. Nor was my uneasiness diminished by the spectacle of Uckridge splashing tactfully in the background like a large seal. Uckridge so far had made no remarks. He had dived in very flat, and I imagine that his breath had not yet returned to him. He had the air of one who intends to get used to his surroundings before trusting himself to speech. The water is delightfully warm," I said. "Oh, it's you," said the professor, and I could not cheat myself into the belief that he spoke cordially. Uckridge snorted loudly in the offing. The professor turned sharply, as if anxious to observe this marine phenomenon, and the annoyed gurgle which he gave showed that he was not approving of Uckridge either. I do not approve of Uckridge myself. I wished he had not come. Uckridge in the water lacks dignity. I felt that he prejudiced my case. "You're swimming splendidly this morning," I went on perseveringly, feeling that an ounce of flattery is worth a pound of rhetoric. "If," I added, "you will allow me to say so." Uh, "I will not," he snapped. "I," here a small wave, noticing that his mouth was open, stepped in. I wish," he resumed warmly, "as I said in my letter, to have nothing to do with you. I consider that you've behaved in a manner that can only be described as abominable, and I will thank you to leave me alone." But allow me— I will not allow ye, sir. I will allow ye nothing. Is it not enough to make me the laughing-stock, the butt, sir, of this town, without pursuing me in this way, when I wish to enjoy a quiet swim? Now, laddie. Now, laddie, said Uckridge, placing a large hand on his shoulder. These are harsh words. Be reasonable. Think before you speak. You little know. Go to the devil, said the professor. I wish to have nothing to do with either of you. I should be glad if you would cease this persecution. Persecution, sir. His remarks, which I have placed on paper as if they were continuous and uninterrupted, were punctuated in reality by a series of gasps and puffings, as he received and rejected the successes of the wave he had swallowed at the beginning of our little chat. The art of conducting conversation while in the water is not given to every swimmer. This he seemed to realize, for, as if to close the interview, he proceeded to make his way as quickly as he could to the shore. Unfortunately, his first dash brought him squarely up against Uckridge, who, not having expected the collision, clutched wildly at him and took him below the surface again. They came up for a moment later on the worst terms. "Are you trying to drown me, sir?" barked the professor. "My dear old horse," said Uckridge complainingly, "it's a little hard. You might look where you're going. You grappled with me. You took me by surprise, laddie. Rid yourself of the impression that you're playing water polo." "But, Professor," I said, joining the group and treading water, "one moment." I was growing annoyed with the man. I could have ducked him, but for the reflection that my prospects of obtaining his consent to my engagement would scarcely have been enhanced thereby. "But, Professor," I said, "one moment." "Go away, sir. I have nothing to say to you." "But he has lots to say to you," said Uckridge. "Now's the time, old horse," he added encouragingly to me. "Spill the news." Without preamble, I gave out the text of my address. "I love your daughter, Phyllis, Mr. Derrick. She loves me. In fact, we're engaged." "Devilishly well put, laddie," said Uckridge approvingly. The professor went under as if he had been seized with cramp. It was a little trying having to argue with a man of whom one could not predict with certainty that at any given moment he would not be under water. It tended to spoil the flow of one's eloquence. The best of arguments is useless if the listener suddenly disappears in the middle of it. "Stick to it, old horse," said Uckridge. "I think you're going to bring it off." I stuck to it. "Mr. Derrick," I said, as his head emerged, "you are naturally surprised." "You would be," said Uckridge. "We don't blame you," he added handsomely. You! As so far from cooling the professor, liberal doses of water seemed to make him more heated. "You impudent scoundrel!" My reply was more gentlemanly, more courteous, on a higher plane altogether. I said winningly, "Cannot we let bygones be bygones?" From his remarks I gathered we could not. I continued. I was under the unfortunate necessity of having to condense my speech. I was not able to let myself go as I could have wished, for time was an important consideration. Ere long, swallowing water at his present rate, the professor must inevitably become waterlogged. "I've loved your daughter," I said rapidly, "ever since I first saw her." "And he's a capital chap," interjected Uckridge. "One of the best. Known him for years. You'll like him. I learned last night that she loved me, but she will not marry me without your consent. Stretch your arms out straight from the shoulders and fill your lungs well, and you can't sink. So I have come this morning to ask for your consent." "Give it," advised Uckridge. "Couldn't do better. Very sound fellow. Pots of money, too. At least he will have when he marries. I know we've not been on the best of terms lately. For heaven's sake, don't try to talk or you'll sink. The fault," I said generously, "was mine." "Well put," said Uckridge. "But when you have heard my explanation, I'm sure you'll forgive me. There, I told you so." He reappeared some few feet to the left. I swam up and resumed. "When you left us so abruptly after our little dinner party—" "Come again some night," said Uckridge cordially. "Any time you're passing. You put me in a very awkward position. I was desperately in love with your daughter. As long as you were in the frame of mind in which you left, I could not hope to find an opportunity of revealing my feelings to her. Feeling feelings is good, said Uckridge approvingly. Neat. You see what a fix I was in, don't you? Keep your arms well out. I thought for hours and hours to try to find some means of bringing about a reconciliation. You wouldn't believe how hard I thought. Got as thin as a corkscrew, said Uckridge. At last, seeing you fishing one morning when I was on the cob, it struck me all of a sudden. You know how it is, said Uckridge. All of a sudden that the very best way would be to arrange a little boating accident. I was confident I could rescue you all right. Here I paused, and he seized the opportunity to curse me, briefly, with a wary eye on an incoming wavelet. If it hadn't been for the inscrutable workings of Providence, which has a mania for upsetting everything, all would have been well. In fact, all was well until he found out. Always the way, said Uckridge sadly. Always the way. You young blackguard! He managed to slip past me and made for the shore. Look at the thing from the standpoint of a philosopher, old horse, urged Uckridge, splashing after him. The fact that the rescue was arranged oughtn't to matter. I mean to say, you didn't know it at the time, so relatively it was not. And you were genuinely saved from a watery grave and all that sort of thing. I had not imagined Uckridge capable of such an excursion into metaphysics. I saw the truth of his line of argument so clearly that it seemed to me impossible for anyone else to get confused over it. I had certainly pulled the professor out of the water, and the fact that I had first caused him to be pushed in had nothing to do with the case. Either a man is a gallant rescuer, or he is not a gallant rescuer. There is no middle course. I had saved his life, for he certainly would have drowned if left to himself, and I was entitled to his gratitude. That was all there was to be said about it. These things both Uckridge and I tried to make plain as we swam along, but whether it was that the salt water he had swallowed, or it was that the salt water he had swallowed had dulled the professor's normally keen intelligence, or that our power of stating a case was too weak, the fact remains that he remained at the beach, or he reached the beach an unconvinced man. Then may I consider, I said, that your objections are removed? I have your consent. He stamped angrily, and his bare foot came down on a small, sharp pebble. With a brief exclamation, he seized his foot in one hand and hopped up the beach. While hopping, he delivered his ultimatum. Probably the only instance on record of a father adopting this attitude while dismissing a suitor. You may not, he cried. You may consider no such thing. My objections were never more absolute. You detain me in the water, sir, till I am blue, sir, blue with cold, in order to listen to the most preposterous and impudent nonsense I have ever heard. This was unjust. If you had listened attentively from the first, and avoided interruptions, and had not behaved like a submarine, we should have got through the business in half the time. I said so. Don't talk to me, sir, he replied, hobbling off to his dressing tent. I will not listen to you. Will have nothing to do with you. I consider you impudent, sir. I assure you it was unintentional. Tch, he said, being the first occasion and the last on which I have ever heard that remarkable monosyllable proceed from the mouth of a man. And he vanished into his tent. Laddie, said Uckridge solemnly, do you know what I think? Well, you haven't clicked, old horse, said Uckridge. To say the least. Okay. And Chapter 20, Scientific Golf. People are continually writing to the papers, or it may be one solitary enthusiast who writes under a number of pseudonyms on the subject of sport, and the overdoing of the same by the modern young man. I recall one letter in which Efficiency gave it as his opinion that if the young man played less golf and did more drill, he would be all the better for it. I proposed to report my doings with the professor on the links at some length, in order to refute this absurd view. Everybody ought to play golf, and nobody can begin it too soon. There ought not to be a single able-bodied infant in the British Isles who is not foozled to drive. To take my case, suppose I had employed in drilling the hours I'd spent in learning to handle my clubs. I might have drilled before the professor by the week without softening his heart. I might have ported arms and grounded arms and presented arms and generally behaved in the manner advocated by efficiency. And what would have been the result? Indifference on his part. Or, if I overdid the thing, irritation. Whereas, by devoting a reasonable portion of my youth to learning the intricacies of golf, I was enabled. It happened this way. Okay, and you haven't. Yes, and that was Uckridge was indeed the master of an artful understatement. Oh, good heavens! It is definitely very late for you, Ned. Good night and sleep well. Thank you for hanging out with us. And have a good evening. Probably see you somewhere around tomorrow. And let's see, it happened this way. Let's go to the next page. Thank you. To me, as I stood with Uckridge in the fowl run in the morning following my maritime conversation with the professor regarding a hen that had posed before us, obviously with a view to inspection, there appeared a man carrying an envelope. Uckridge, who by this time saw, as Calverley almost said, under every hat a dun, and imagined that no envelope could contain anything but a small account, softly and silently vanished away, leaving me to interview the enemy. "Mr. Garnett, sir?" said the foe. I recognized him. He was Professor Derrick's gardener. I opened the envelope. No, father's blessings were absent. The letter was in the third person. Professor Derrick begged to inform Mr. Garnett that, by defeating Mr. Saul Potter, he had qualified for the final round of the Com Regis golf tournament, in which he understood Mr. Garnett was to be his opponent. If it would be convenient for Mr. Garnett to play off the match on the present afternoon, Professor Derrick would be obliged if he would be at the clubhouse at 2:30. If this hour and day were unsuitable, would he kindly arrange others? The bearer would wait. The bearer did wait. He waited for half an hour, as I found it impossible to shift him, not caring to use violence on a man well stricken in years, without first plying him with drink. He absorbed more of our diminishing cask of beer than we could conveniently spare, and then trudged off with a note, beautifully written in the third person, in which Mr. Garnett, after numerous compliments and thanks, begged to inform Professor Derrick that he would be at the clubhouse at the hour mentioned. And, I added, to myself, not in the note, I will give him such a licking that he'll brain himself with a cleek. I'm guessing that a cleek is a type of golf club? Possibly. I don't know. I'm going to go with that, though. For I was not pleased with the professor. I was conscious of a malicious joy at the prospect of snatching the prize from him. I knew he had set his heart on winning the tournament this year. To be a runner-up 2 years in succession stimulates the desire for first place. It would be doubly bitter to him to be beaten by a newcomer after the absence of his rival, the colonel, had awakened hope in him. And I knew I could do it. Even allowing for bad luck, and I'm never a very unlucky golfer, I could rely almost with certainty on crushing the man. "And I'll do it," I said to Bob, who had trotted up. I often make Bob the recipient of my confidences. He listens appreciatively and never interrupts. He never has grievances of his own. If there is one person I dislike, it is the man who tries to air his grievances when I wish to air mine. "Bob," I said, running his tail through my fingers. Reminder that Bob is the dog. Listen to me, my old university chum, for I have matured a dark scheme. Don't run away. You know you don't really want to go and look at that chicken. Listen to me. If I am informed this afternoon, and I feel in my bones that I shall nurse the professor. I shall play with him. Do you understand the principles of match play at golf, Robert? You score by holes, not strokes. There are 18 holes. All right. How was I? All right. How was I to know that you knew that without my telling you? Well, if you understand so much about the game, you will appreciate my dark scheme. I shall toy with the professor, Bob. I shall let him get ahead, and then catch him up. I shall go ahead myself, and let him catch me up. I shall race him neck and neck to the very end. Then, when his hair has turned white with the strain, and he's lost a couple of stone in weight, and his eyes are starting out of his head, and he's praying, if he ever does pray, to the gods of golf that he may be allowed to win, I shall go ahead and beat him by a hole. I'll teach him, Robert. He shall taste of my despair, and learn by proof in some wild hour how much the wretched dare. And when it's all over, and he's torn his town. Hydration break. 1 moment. Okay. And he's torn all his hair out and smashed all his clubs. I shall go and commit suicide off the cob. Okay, was not seeing that coming. Um, content warning for over dramatic things. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Did not realize that we were going to go quite there. He's not serious. I'm quite positive because that's not the Woodhouse way. Uh, Bob wagged. Because you see, if I can't marry Phyllis, I shan't have any use for life. Bob wagged his tail cheerfully. I mean it, I said, rolling him on his back and punching him on the chest till his breathing became stentorous. Stertorous. Sorry, not stentorous. Stertor. You don't see the sense of it, I know. But then you've got none of the finer feelings. You're a jolly good dog, Robert, but you're a rank materialist. Bones and cheese and potatoes with gravy over them make you happy. Make me happy too. Well, not the bones. You don't know what it is to be in love. Get right side. You'd better get right side up now, or you'll have apoplexy. It has been my aim in the course of this narrative to extenuate nothing, nor set down aught in malice. Like the gentleman who played euchre with the heathen. Oh, okay. This is where the 1906 comes in. I don't even recognize the reference. Like the general, we'll just end with in that sentence or that phrase with like the gentleman who played euchre. I've stated but facts. Um, hmm, yeah, this is a problem with blind reading or first time readings that you come across all sorts of things that are not acceptable in today's language. I We're moving on from that. I do not, therefore, slur over my scheme for disturbing the professor's peace of mind. I'm not always good and noble. I am the hero of the story, but I have my off moments. I felt ruthless toward the professor. I cannot plead ignorance of the golfer's point of view as an excuse for my plottings. I knew that to one whose soul is in the game, as the professor's was, the agony of being just beaten in an important match exceeds in bitterness all other agonies. I knew that, if I scraped through by the smallest possible margin, his appetite would be destroyed, his sleep o' nights broken. He would wake from fitful slumber, moaning that if he had only used his iron instead of his mashie at the 10th, all would have been well. That if he had putted more carefully on the 7th green, life would not be drear and blank. That a more judicious manipulation of his brassy throughout might have given him something to live for. All these things I knew. I think I'm going to sleep. Pardon me. Sorry. And they did not touch me. I was adamant. The professor was waiting for me at the clubhouse and greeted me with a cold and stately inclination of the head. beautiful day for golf, I observed in my gay, chatty manner. He bowed in silence. Very well, I thought. Wait. Just wait. Miss Derrick is well, I hope, I added aloud. That drew him. He started. His aspect became doubly forbidding. Miss Derrick is perfectly well, sir, I thank you. And you? And you? No bad effect, I hope, from your dip yesterday? Mr. Garnet, I came here for golf, not conversation, he said. We made it so. I drove off from the first tee. It was a splendid drive. I should not say so if there were anyone else to say so, to say so for me. Modesty would forbid. But as there is no one, I must repeat the statement. It was one of the best drives in my experience. The ball flashed through the air, took the bunker with a dozen feet to spare, and rolled on to the green. I'd felt all along that I should be in form, unless my opponent was equally above himself. He was a lost man. I could toy with him. The excellence of my drive had not been without its effect on the professor. I could see that he was not confident. He addressed his ball more strangely and at greater length than anyone I had ever seen. He waggled his club over it as if he were going to perform a conjuring trick. Then he struck and topped it. The ball rolled 2 yards. He looked at it in silence. Then he looked at me, also in silence. I was gazing seawards. When I looked round, he was getting to work with the brassy. This time he hit the bunker and rolled back. He repeated this maneuver twice. Hard luck, murmured sympathetically on the third occasion, thereby going as near to being slain with a niblick as it has ever been my lot to go. Your true golfer is easily roused in times of misfortune, and there was a red gleam in the eye of the professor turned to me. I shall pick my ball up, he growled. We walked on in silence to the second tee. He did the second hole in 4, which was good. I did in 3, which, unfortunately for him, was better. I won the 3rd hole. I won the 4th hole. I won the 5th hole. Yes, indeed, Tilly. I glanced at my opponent out of the corner of my eyes. The man was suffering. Beads of perspiration stood out on his forehead. His play had become wilder and wilder at each hole in arithmetical progression. If he had been a plough, he could hardly have turned up more soil. The imagination recoiled from the thought of what he could be doing in another half-hour if he deteriorated at his present speed. A feeling of calm and content stole over me. I was not sorry for him. All the viciousness of my nature was uppermost in me. Once, when he missed the ball clean at the 5th tee, his eye met mine. We stood staring at each other for a full half-minute without moving. I believe if I'd smiled then, he would have attacked me without hesitation. There is a type of golfer who really almost ceases to be human under stress, the wild agony of a series of foozles. The 6th hole involves the player in a somewhat tricky piece of cross-country work, owing to the fact that there is a nasty ditch to be negotiated some 50 yards from the green. It's a beast of a ditch, which, if you are out of luck, just catches your second shot. All hope abandon ye who enter here might be written on a notice board above it. The professor entered there. The unhappy man sent his second, as nice and clean as brassy a shot as he had made all day, into its very jaws. And then madness seized him. A merciful local rule, framed by kindly men who have been in that ditch themselves, enacts that in such a case the player may take his ball and throw it over his shoulder, losing a stroke. But once, so the legend runs, a scratch man who found himself trapped, scorning to avail himself of this rule at the expense of its accompanying penalty, wrought so shrewdly with his niblick that he not only got out, but actually laid his ball dead. And now optimists sometimes imitate his gallantry, although though no one has yet been able to imitate his success. The professor decided to take a chance, and he failed miserably. As I was on the green with my third, and, unless I putted extremely poorly, was morally certain to be down in five, which is bogey for the hole, there was not much practical use in his continuing to struggle. But he did it in a spirit of pure vindictiveness, as if he were trying to take it out of the ball. It was a grisly sight to see him, head and shoulders above the ditch, hewing at his obstinate colonel. It was a similar spectacle that once induced a lay spectator of a golf match to observe that he considered hockey a silly game. 16, said the professor between his teeth. Then he picked up the ball. I won the 7th hole. I won the 8th hole. The 9th we halved, for in the black depths of my soul I had formed a plan of fiendish subtlety. I intended to allow him to win, with extreme labour, 8 holes in succession. Then, when hope was once more strong in him, I would win the last, and he would go mad. I watched him carefully as we trudged along. Emotions chased one another across his face. When he won the 10th hole, he merely refrained from oaths. When he won the 11th, a sort of sullen pleasure showed in his face. It was at the 13th that I detected the first dawning of hope. From then onward, it grew. When, with a sequence of shocking shots, he took the 17th hole in 7, he was in a parlous condition. His run of success had engendered within him a desire for conversation. He wanted, as it were, to flap his wings and crow. I could see dignity wrestling with talkativeness. I gave him the lead. "You got your form now," he said. Talkativeness had it. Dignity retired hurt. Speech came from him in a rush. When he brought off an excellent drive from the 18th tee, he seemed to forget everything. "My dear boy," he began, and stopped abruptly in some confusion. Silence once more brooded over us as we played ourselves up the fairway and on to the green. He was on the green in 4. I reached it in 3. His 6th stroke took him out. I putted carefully to the very mouth of the hole. I walked up to my ball and paused. I looked at the professor. He looked at me. "Go on," he said hoarsely. Suddenly, a wave of compassion flooded over me. What right had I to torture the man like this? "Professor," I said. "Go on," he repeated. "That looks like a simple shot," I said, eyeing him steadily. "But I might miss it." He started. "And then you would win the championship." He dabbed at his forehead with a wet ball of a handkerchief. "It would be very pleasant for you after getting so near it in the last 2 years." "Go on," he said, for the 3rd time, but there was a note of hesitation in his voice. "Sudden joy," I said, "would almost certainly make me miss it." We looked at each other. He had the golf fever in his eyes. "If," I said slowly, lifting my putter, "you were to give your consent to my marriage with Phyllis—" He looked from me to the ball, from the ball to me, and back to the ball. It was very, very near the hole. "Why not?" I said. He looked up and burst into a roar of laughter. "You young devil," said he, smiting his thigh. "Young devil, you've beaten me." "On the contrary," I said, "you have beaten me." I left the professor at the clubhouse and raced back to the farm. I wanted to pour my joys into a sympathetic ear. Uckridge, I knew, would offer that same sympathetic ear. A good fellow, Uckridge, always interested in what you had to tell him, never bored. "Uckridge!" I shouted. No answer. I flung open the dining room door. Nobody. I went into the drawing room. It was empty. I drew the garden and his bedroom. It was not in either. "He must have gone for a stroll," I said. I rang the bell. The hired retainer appeared, calm and imperturbable as ever. "Sir?" "Oh, where is Mr. Uckridge, Beale?" "Mr. Uckridge, sir," said the hired retainer nonchalantly, "is gone." "Gone?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Uckridge and Mrs. Uckridge went away together by 3 o'clock train." And we have 3 more chapters. It is, we've only been going for an hour and a half, so I think I'm going to try to push on, try to finish this, if that's all right with everyone. So, moving on to chapter 21, The Calm Before the Storm. "Beale," I said. "Oh, oh, okay. Oh, thank you for hanging out with me, Magpie. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry that you need to go on break and can't get a signal. So, but it's always good to have you here when you can be. So, take care and stay safe, and I'll see you later." "Cool. Thanks." And let's see, where are we? The calm before the storm. "Beale," I said, "are you drunk?" "I wish I was, sir," said the hired man. "What on earth do you mean? Gone? Where have they gone to?" "Don't know, sir. London, I expect." "London? Why?" "Don't know, sir." "When did they go? You told me that. Why didn't they say they were going? What, didn't they say why they were going? Sorry. Uh, no, sir." "Didn't you ask? When you saw them packing up and going to the station, didn't you do anything?" "No, sir." "Why on earth not?" "Well, I didn't see them, sir. I only found out as they'd gone after they'd been in wind, sir. Walking down by the net in Mackerel, met one of them coastguards. 'Oh,' says he, 'so you're moving?' 'Who's moving?' I says to him. 'Well,' he says to me, 'I seen your Mr. Uckridge and his missus getting into the 3 o'clock train for Axminster. Thought as you were all moving.' 'Oh,' I says, 'Ho, wondering,' and I goes on. When I gets back, asks the missus, did she see them packing their boxes, and she says no. She says they didn't pack no boxes as she knowed of. Blowed if they had, Mr. Garnett, sir." "What, they didn't pack?" "No, sir." We looked at each other. "Beale," I said. "Sir." "Do you know what I think?" "Yes, sir." "They've bolted." So I says to the missus, sir. Struck me right off, in a manner of speaking. "This is awful," I said. "Yes, sir." His face betrayed no emotion, but he was one of those men whose expression never varies. It's the way they have in the army. "This wants thinking out, Beale." "Yes, sir." "Better ask Mrs. Beale to give me some dinner, and then I'll think it over." "Yes, sir." I was in an unpleasant position. Uckridge, by his defection, had left me in charge of the farm. I could dissolve the concern, I suppose, if I wished, and return to London, but I particularly desired to remain in Combe Regis. To complete the victory I'd won on the links, it was necessary for me to continue as I had begun. I was in the position of a general who has conquered a hostile country, and is obliged to soothe the feelings of the conquered people before his labours can be considered at an end. I had rushed the professor. It must now be my aim to keep him from regretting that he had been rushed. I must, therefore, stick to my post with the tenacity of an able-bodied leech. There would be trouble, of that I was certain. As soon as the news got about that Uckridge had gone, the deluge would begin. His creditors would abandon their passive tactics and take active steps. There was a chance that aggressive measures would be confined to the enemy at our gates, the tradesmen of Cum Regis. But the probability was that the news would spread, and the injured merchants of Dorchester and Axminster rushed to the scene of hostilities. I summoned Beale after dinner and held a council of war. But it was no time for airy persiflage. I said, Beale, we're in the cart. Sir, Mr. Uckridge going away like this has left me in a most unpleasant position. I would like to talk it over with you. I dare say you know that that Mr. Uckridge owes a considerable amount of money around here to tradesmen. Yes, sir. Well, when they find out that he has, short the moon, sir, suggested the hired retainer helpfully, gone up to town, I amended. When they find out that he has gone up to town, they are likely to come bothering us a good deal. Yes, sir. I fancy that we shall have them all round here tomorrow. News of this sort always spreads quickly. The point is, then, what are we going to do? He propounded no scheme, but stood in an easy attitude of attention, waiting for me to continue. I continued. Let's see exactly how we stand, I said. My point is that I particularly wish to go on living down here for at least another fortnight. Of course, my position is simple. I'm Mr. Uckridge's guest. I shall go on living as I have been doing up to the present. He asked me down here to help him look after the fowls, so I shall go on looking after them. Complications set in when we come to consider you and Mrs. Beale. I suppose you won't care to stop on after this? The hired retainer scratched his chin and glanced out of the window. The moon was up, and the garden looked cool and mysterious in the dim light. It's a pretty place, Mr. Garnet, sir, he said. It is, I said. But what about other considerations? There's the matter of wages. Are yours in arrears? Yes, sir. A month. And Mrs. Beale's the same, I suppose? Yes, sir. A month. Seems to me, Beale, that you can't lose anything by stopping on. Can't be paid any less than I've been, sir, he agreed. Exactly. And as you say, it's a pretty place. You might just as well stop on and help me in the fowl run. What do you think? Very well, sir. And Mrs. Beale will do the same. Yes, sir. He could have asked her, but okay. That's excellent. You're a hero, Miss Beale. I shan't forget you. There's a cheque coming to me from a magazine in another week for a short story. When it arrives, I'll look into that matter of back wages. Tell Mrs. Beale I'm much obliged to her, will you? Yes, sir. Having concluded that delicate business, I lit my pipe and strolled out into the garden with Bob. I cursed Uckridge as I walked. It was abominable of him to desert me in this way. Even if I had not been his friend, it would have been bad. The fact that we had known each other for years made it doubly discreditable. He might at least have warned me, given me the option of leaving the sinking ship with him. But, I reflected, I ought not to be surprised. His whole career, as long as I had known him, had been dotted with little eccentricities, the type which the unfeeling world generally stigmatizes as shady. They were small things, it was true, but they ought to have warned me. We are most of us wise after the event. When the wind has blown, we can generally discover a multitude of straws which should have shown us the way in which it was blowing. Once, I remembered, in our schoolmaster days, when guineas, though regular, were few, he had had occasion to increase his wardrobe. If I recollect correctly, he thought he had a chance of good position in the tutoring line, and only needed good clothes to make it his. He took £4 of his salary in advance, He was in the habit of doing this. He never had any salary left by the end of term, it having vanished in advance loans beforehand. With this, he was able to buy 2 suits, a hat, new boots, and collars. When it came to making the purchases, he found what he had overlooked previously in his optimistic way, that £4 did not go very far. At the time, I remember, I thought his method of grappling with the situation humorous. He bought a hat. He bought a hat for 3 and 6pence, and got the suits and boots on the instalment system, paying a small sum in advance as earnest of more to come. He then pawned 1 suit to pay for the first few instalments, and finally departed to be known no more. His address he had given, with a false name, at an empty house, and when the tailor arrived with his minions for the law, all he found was an annoyed caretaker and a pile of letters written by himself, containing his bill in the various stages of evolution. Or again, there was a bicycle and photograph shop near the school. He went into this one day, and his roving eye fell on a tandem bicycle. He did not want a tandem bicycle, but that influenced him not at all. He ordered it provisionally. He also ordered an enlarging camera, a Kodak, and a magic lantern. The order was booked, and the goods were to be delivered when he had made up his mind concerning them. After a week, the shopman sent round to ask if there were any further particulars which Mr. Uckridge would like to learn before definitely ordering them. Mr. Uckridge sent back word that he was considering the matter, and that, in the meantime, would he be so good as to let him have that little clockwork man in his window, which walked when wound up. Having got this, and not paid for it, Uckridge thought that he had done handsomely by the bicycle and photograph man, and that things were square between them. The latter met him a few days afterward, and expostulated plaintively. Uckridge explained. "My good man," he said, "you know, I really think we need say no more about the matter. Really, you've come out of it very well. Look here, which would you rather be owed for? A clockwork man, which is broken, and you can have it back, or a tandem bicycle, an enlarging camera, a Kodak, and a magic lantern?" What? His reasoning was too subtle for the uneducated mind. The man retired, puzzled and unpaid, and Uckridge kept the clockwork toy. Yeah, so basically Uckridge has been a bastard all along. Chapter 22. The Storm Breaks. Rather to my surprise, the next morning passed off uneventfully. Our knocker advertised no dun. Our lawn remained untrodden by hobnailed boots. By lunchtime, I had come to the conclusion that the expected trouble would not occur that day, and I felt that I might well leave my post for the afternoon while I went to the professor's to pay my respects. The professor was out when I arrived. Phyllis was in, and it was not till the evening that I started for the farm again. As I approached, the sound of voices smote my ears. I stopped. I could hear Beale speaking. Then came the rich notes of Vickers, the butcher. Then Beale again. Then Dawlish the grocer. Then a chorus. The storm had burst, and in my absence. I blushed for myself. I was in command, and I had deserted the fort in time of need. What must the faithful hired man be thinking of me? Probably he placed me as he had placed Uckridge in the ragged ranks of those who have shot the moon. Unfortunately, having just come from the professor's, I was in the costume which all of my wardrobe was, the costume which of all of my wardrobe was the most calculated to impress. To a casual observer, I should probably suggest wealth and respectability. I stopped for a moment to cool myself, for, as is my habit, when pleased with life, I had been walking fast, then opened the gate and strode in, trying to look as opulent as possible. It was an animated scene that met my eyes. In the middle of the lawn stood the devoted Beale, a little more flushed than I had seen him hitherto, parleying with a burly and excited young man without a coat. Grouped round the pair were some dozen men, young, middle-aged, and old, all talking their hardest. I could distinguish nothing of what they were saying. I noticed that Beale's left cheekbone was a little discolored. There was a hard, dogged expression on his face. He, too, was in his shirt sleeves. My entry created no sensation. Nobody apparently had heard the latch click. Nobody caught sight of me. Their eyes were fixed on the young man and Beale. I stood at the gate and watched them. One moment. Hydration. All right. Sorry. There seemed to have been trouble already. Looking more closely, I perceived sitting on the grass, apart, a second young man. His face was obscured by a dirty pocket handkerchief, with which he dabbed tenderly at his features. Every now and then the shirt-sleeved young man flung his hand toward him with an indignant gesture, talking all the while. It did not need a preternaturally keen observer to deduce what had happened. Beale must have fallen out with the young man who was sitting on the grass and smitten him, and now his friend had taken up the quarrel. Now this, I said to myself, is rather interesting. Here, in this one farm, we have the only 3 known methods of dealing with duns. Beale is evidently an exponent of the violent method. Uckridge is an apostle of evasion. I shall try conciliation. I wonder which of us will be the most successful. Meanwhile, not to spoil Beale's efforts by allowing him too little scope for experiment, I refrained from making my presence known, and continued to stand by the gate, an interested spectator. Things were evidently moving now. The young man's gestures became more vigorous. The dogged look on Beale's face deepened. The comments of the ring increased in point and pungency. "What do you hit him for, then?" The question was put, always the same words, and with the same air of quiet triumph, at intervals of 30 seconds, by a little man in a snuff-coloured suit with a purple tie. Nobody ever answered him, or appeared to listen to him, but he seemed each time to think that he had clinched the matter and cornered his opponent. Other voices chimed in. "You hit him, Charlie. Go on, you hit him. We'll have the law. Go on, Charlie." Flushed with the favours of the many-headed, Charlie now proceeded from threats to action. His right fist swung round suddenly, but Beale was on the alert. He ducked sharply, and the next moment Charlie was sitting on the ground beside his fallen friend. A hush fell on the ring, and the little man in the purple tie was left repeating his formula without support. I advanced. It seemed to me that the time had come to be conciliatory. Charlie was struggling to his feet, obviously anxious for a second round, and Beale was getting into position once more. In another 5 minutes, conciliation would be out of the question. "What's all this?" I said. I may mention here that I do not propose to inflict dialect upon the reader. If he had borne with my narrative thus far, I look on him as a friend, and feel that he deserves consideration. I may not have brought out the fact with sufficient emphasis in the foregoing pages, but nevertheless I protest that I have a conscience. Not so much as a thickie shall he find. That's kind of going over my head, but okay. My advent caused a stir. Excited men left Beale and rallied round me. Charlie, rising to his feet, found himself dethroned from his position of man of the moment, and stood blinking at the setting sun and opening and shutting his mouth. There was a buzz of conversation. Don't all speak at once, please," I said. "I can't possibly follow what you say. Perhaps you will tell me what you want?" I singled out a short, stout man in grey. He wore the largest whiskers I've ever seen on a human face. "It's like this, sir. We all of us want to know where we are." "I can tell you that," I said. "You're on our lawn." and I should be much obliged if you would stop digging your heels into it. This was not, I suppose, conciliation in the strictest and best sense of the word, but the thing had to be said. It is the duty of every good citizen to do his best to score off men with whiskers. You don't understand me, sir, he said excitedly. When I said we didn't know where we were, it was a manner of speaking. We want to know where we stand. On your heels, I replied gently, as I pointed out before. I am Brass, sir, of Axminster. My account with Mr. Uckridge is £10, 8 shillings, and fourpence. I want to know, the whole strength of the company now joined in. You know me, Mr. Garnet, Appleby in the high voice lost in the general roar. And eightpence. My account with Mr. Settle. I represent Bodger. A diversion occurred at this point. Charlie, who had long been eyeing Beale sourly, dashed at him with swinging fists, and was knocked down again. The whole trend of the meeting altered once more. Conciliation became a drug. Violence was what the public wanted. Beale had 3 fights in rapid succession. I was helpless. Instinct prompted me to join the fray, but prudence told me that such a course would be fatal. At last, in a lull, I managed to catch the hired retainer by the arm, and as he drew back from the prostrate form of his latest victim, "Drop it, Veal. Veal? Veal? Okay, sorry. Drop it, Beale," I whispered hotly. "Drop it. We shall never manage these people if you knock them about. Go indoors and stay there while I talk to them." "Mr. Garnet, sir," said he, the light of battle dying out of his eyes. "It's odd. It's cruel odd. I ain't had a turn-up, not to call it turn-up, since I've been a time-expired man. I ain't eaten of 'em, Mr. Garnet, not hard, I ain't. That there first one of him, he played me dirty, hitting at me when I wasn't looking. They can't say as I started it." "That's all right, Beale," I said soothingly. "I know it wasn't your fault, and I know it's hard on you to have to stop, but I wish you would go indoors. I must talk to these men, and we shan't have a moment's peace while you're here. Cut along." "Very well, sir. But it's hard. Mayn't I have just one go at that Charlie, Mr. Garnet?" he asked wistfully. No, go in. If they goes for you, sir, and tries to wipe your face off, tries to wipe the face off you, they won't. If they do, I'll shout for you." He went reluctantly into the house, and I turned again to my audience. "If you will kindly be quiet for a moment," I said. "I am Appleby, Mr. Stop! The babble continued, but greatly diminished in volume. I'm misreading all of these words, but diminished gradually in volume. Through the trees, as I waited, I caught a glimpse of the sea. I wished I was out on the cob, where beyond these voices there was peace. My head was beginning to ache, and I felt faint for want of food. "Gentlemen!" I cried, as the noise died away. The latch of the gate clicked. I looked up and saw a tall, thin young man in a frock coat and silk hat enter the garden. It was the first time I had seen the costume in the country. He approached me. "Mr. Uckridge, sir," he said. "My name is Garnet. Mr. Uckridge is away at the moment. I come from Whitley's, Mr. Garnet. Mr. Blenkinsop having written on several occasions to Mr. Uckridge, calling his attention to the fact that his account has been allowed to mount to a considerable figure, and having received no satisfactory reply, desired me to visit him. I am sorry that he is not at home." "So am I," said with feeling. "Do you expect him to return shortly?" "No, I do not." He was looking curiously at the expectant band of duns. I forestalled his question. "These are some of Mr. Uckridge's creditors," I said. "I am just about to address them. Perhaps will take a seat? The grass is quite dry. Uh, my remarks will embrace you as well as them. Comprehension came into his eyes, and the natural man in him peeped through the polish. "Great Scott!" he said. "Has he done a bunk?" he cried. "To the best of my knowledge, yes," I said. He whistled. I turned again to the local talent. "Gentlemen!" "Hear, hear!" said some idiot. "Gentlemen, I intend to be quite frank with you. We must decide just how matters stand between us." Voice. "Where's Uckridge?" "Mr. Uckridge left for London suddenly." Bitter laughter. "Yesterday afternoon. Personally, I think he will come back very shortly." Hoots of derision greeted this prophecy. I resumed. "I fail to see your object in coming here. I have nothing for you. I couldn't pay your bills if I wanted to." It began to be borne upon me that I was becoming unpopular. "I'm simply here as Mr. Uckridge's guest," I proceeded. After all, why should I spare the man? I have nothing whatsoever to do with his business affairs. I refuse absolutely to be regarded as in any way indebted to you. I'm sorry for you. You have my sympathy. That's all I can give you, sympathy and good advice." Dissatisfaction. I was getting myself disliked, and I had meant to be so conciliatory, to speak to these unfortunates words of cheer which would be as olive oil poured into a wound. For I really did sympathize with them. I considered that Uckridge had used them disgracefully. But I was irritated. My head ached abominably. Then am I to tell Mr. Blenkinsop," asked the frock-coated one, "that the money is not and will not be forthcoming?" "When next you smoke a quiet cigar with your Mr. Blenkinsop," I replied courteously, "and find conversation flagging, I rather think I should say something of the sort. We shall, of course, instruct our solicitors at once to institute legal proceedings against your Mr. Uckridge." "Don't call him my Mr. Uckridge. You can do whatever you please." "That is your last word on the subject?" "I hope so, but I fear not." "Where's our money?" demanded a discontented voice from the crowd. An idea struck me. "Beale!" I shouted. Out came the retired retainer of the double. I fancy he thought that his help was needed to save me from my friends. He slowed down, seeing me as yet unassaulted. "Sir," he said, "isn't there a case of that whiskey left somewhere, Beale?" I had struck the right note. There was a hush of pleased anticipation among the audience. "Yes, sir, one." Then bring it out here and open it." Beale looked pained. "For them, sir!" he ejaculated. Reminder that ejaculate is also used as a synonym for burst out, to interject, to exclaim. So just in case you haven't encountered that word in its literary sense, so not meaning anything more personal, shall we say. Okay, where was I? Yes, hurry up." He hesitated, then without a word went into the house. A hearty cheer went up as he reappeared with the case. I proceeded indoors in search of glasses and water. Coming out, I realized my folly in having left Beale alone with our visitors even for a minute. A brisk battle was raging between him and a man whom I did not remember to have seen before. The frock-coated man was looking on with pale fear stamped upon his face, but the rest of the crowd were shouting advice and encouragement. Encouragement was being given to Beale. I wondered, had he pacified the mob? I soon discovered. As I ran up, as quickly as I could, hampered as I was by the jugs and glasses, Beale knocked his man out with the clean precision of the experienced boxer, and the crowd explained in chorus that it was the pot-boy from the net mackerel. Like everything else, the whiskey had not been paid for, and the potboy, arriving just as the case was being opened, had made a gallant effort to save it from being distributed free to his fellow citizens. By the time he came to, glasses were circulating merrily, and on observing this, he accepted the situation philosophically enough, and took his turn and turn about with the others. Everybody was now in excellent fettle. The only malcontents were Beale, whose heart plainly bled at the waste of such good Scotch whisky, and the frock-coated young man, who was still pallid. I was just congratulating myself, as I eyed the revellers, on having achieved a masterstroke of strategy, when that demon Charlie, his defeat, I suppose, still rankling, made a suggestion. From his point of view, a timely and ingenious suggestion. "Can't see the colour of our money," he said bitterly, "but we can have our own back." That settled it. The battle was over. The most skilful general must sometimes recognize defeat. I recognized it then, and threw up my hand. I could do nothing further with them. I had done my best for the farm. I could do no more. I lit my pipe, and strolled into the paddock. Chaos followed. Indoors and out of doors they raged, without check. Even Beale gave the thing up. He knocked Charlie into a flower bed, then disappeared in the direction of the kitchen. It was growing dusk. From inside the house came faint sounds of bibulous mirth, as the sacking party emptied the rooms of their contents. In the fowl run, a hen was crooning sleepily in its coop. It was a very soft, liquid, soothing sound. Presently out came the invaders with their loot, one with a picture, another with a vase, another bearing the gramophone upside down. They were singing in many keys and times. Then I heard somebody, Charlie again, it seemed to me, propose a raid on the fowl run. The fowls had had their moments of unrest since they had been our property, but what they had gone through with us was peace compared with what befell them then. Oh, no! Not even on the second evening of our visit, when we had run unmeasured miles in pursuit of them, had there been such confusion. Roused abruptly from their beauty sleep, they fled in all directions. Their pursuers, roaring with laughter, staggered after them. They tumbled over one another. The summer evening was made hideous with the noise of them. "Disgraceful, sir! Is it not disgraceful?" said a voice in my ear. The young man from Whitley's stood beside me. He did not look happy. His forehead was damp. Somebody seemed to have stepped on his hat, and his coat was smeared with mould. I was turning to answer him when from the dusk, in the direction of the house, came a sudden roar, a passionate appeal to the world in general to tell the speaker what all this meant. There was only one man of my acquaintance with a voice like that. I walked without hurry toward him. "Good evening, Uckridge." And, oh, welcome. Yes, foul conduct. Indeed, foul. Uh, the most foul, indeed. Welcome back, Magpie. I think I am going to finish the last chapter, but I'm going to take a quick break, just for a few minutes, because I've been going for about 2 hours, and I am almost out of water. So be right back. Sorry to duck away just as you come back, but I'll be back shortly. Just a sec. And where's my break screen? There. And back. Sorry for the quick break there, but hopefully we will be finishing the last chapter and expecting a happy ending. Fingers crossed. It's Woodhouse. Usually you do have a happy ending for the protagonists at least. So, chapter 23, After the Storm. A yell of welcome drowned the tumult of the looters. Where is my mouse? That would be having a mouse would be helpful. Okay, is that you, Garney, old horse? What's up? What's the matter? Has everyone gone mad? Who are these infernal scoundrels in the Fall Run? What are they doing? What's been happening? I've been entertaining a little meeting of your creditors, I said, and now they are entertaining themselves. But what did you let them do it for? What is one amongst so many? Upon my Sam, moaned Duckridge, as her sardonic calm laid aside that sinister hen which we called Aunt Elizabeth, flashed past us, pursued by the whiskered criminal. It's a little hard. Can't go away for a day. You certainly can't. You're right there. Can't go away without a word. Without a word? What do you mean? Garney, old boy, pull yourself together. You're overexcited. Do you mean to tell me you didn't get my note? What note? The one I left on the dining room table. There was no note there. What? I was reminded of the scene that had taken place on the first day of our visit. Feel in your pockets, I said. Why, damn, here it is, he said in amazement. Yes, very nice callback. Of course. Of course. What did you expect it would be? Was it important? Why, it explained the whole thing. Then, I said, I wish you would let me read it. A note like that ought to be worth reading. I was telling you to sit tight and not worry about us going away. That's good about worrying. You're a thoughtful chap, Buckridge, because we would be back immediately. And what sent you up to town? Why, we went to touch Milly's Aunt Elizabeth. Oh, I said, the light shining on the darkness of my understanding. You remember Aunt Elizabeth, the old girl who wrote that letter. I remember. I know. You should call you a gaby. And a guffin. Yes, I remember thinking her a shrewd and discriminating old lady, with a great gift for character delineation. So you went to touch her? That's right. So that's it. We had to have more money. I naturally thought of her. Aunt Elizabeth isn't what you might call an admirer of mine, bless her for that, but she's very fond of Milly, and would do anything if she is allowed to chuck about a few home truths before doing it. So we went off together. Sorry, one hydration moment, please. Okay. Okay, where were we? So we went off together, looked her up at her house, stated our case, and collected the stuff. Milly and I shared the work. She did the asking, while I inquired after the rheumatism. She mentioned the figure that would clear us. I patted the dog. Little beast. Got after me when I wasn't looking and chewed my ankle. Thank heaven. In the end, Milly got the money, and I got the home truths. Did she call you a gaby? Twice. And a guffin 3 times. Your Aunt Elizabeth is beginning to fascinate me. She seems just the sort of woman I would like. Well, you got the money. Rather. I'll tell you another thing, old horse. I scored heavily at the end of the visit. She'd got to the quoting proverbs stage by that time. Ah, my dear, she said to Milly, marry in haste, repent at leisure. Milly stood up to her like a little brick. I'm afraid that proverb doesn't apply to me, Aunt Elizabeth, she said, because I haven't repented. What do you think of that, laddie? Of course she hasn't had much leisure lately. I agreed. Uckridge's jaw dropped slightly, but he rallied swiftly. Idiot! That wasn't what you meant. Milly's an angel. Of course she is, I said cordially. She's a precious sight too good for you, you old rotter. You bear that fact steadily in mind, and we'll make something of you yet. At this point Mrs. Uckridge joined us. She had been exploring the house and noting the damage done. Her eyes were open to the fullest extent. Oh, Mr. Garnet, couldn't you have stopped them? I felt a worm. I had done as much as I might have done to stem the tide. I'm awfully sorry, Mrs. Uckridge, I said humbly. I really don't think I could have done much more. We tried every method. Beale had 7 fights, and I made a speech on the lawn, but it was all no good. Directly they had finished the whisky, Uckridge's cry was like that of a lost spirit. They didn't get hold of the whisky! They did. It seemed to me that it would smooth things down a little if I served it out. The mob had begun to get a trifle out of hand. I thought those horrid men were making a lot of noise, said Mrs. Uckridge. Uckridge preserved a gloomy silence. Of all the disasters of that stricken field, I think the one that came home most poignantly to him was the loss of the whisky. It seemed to strike him like a blow. Isn't it about time to collect these men and explain things? I suggested. I don't believe any of them know you've come back. A lost spirit, yes. Yeah, yes, a lost spirit. Yeah. Good old Woodhouse was not above the occasional pun. Um, it's, they will, said Uckridge grimly, coming out of his trance. They soon will. Where's Beale? Beale! The hired retainer came running out at the sound of the well-remembered voice. Lummy! I'm not sure exactly how to Lummy? Lummy. Maybe. Is that I'm not sure how to deliver that, but uh I'm going to change that to gosh, because I know gosh, Mr. Uckridge, sir. He gasped. I'm not entirely sure how to accent that. Lumi, lam. Never mind. Moving on. It was the first time Beale had ever betrayed any real emotion in my presence. To him, I suppose, the return of Uckridge was as sensational and astonishing an event as a reappearance from the tomb. He was not accustomed to find those who had shot the moon revisiting their ancient haunts. Beale, let's see, Beale, go round the place and tell those scoundrels I've come back and would like a word with them on the lawn. And if you find any of them stealing the fowls, knock them down. I've knocked down 1 or 2, said Mr. Beale with approval. That Charlie. Beale, said Uckridge, much moved, you're an excellent fellow, one of the very best. I will pay you your back wages before I go to bed. These fellows, sir, said Beale, having expressed his gratification. They've been scattered, most of them birds already, sir. Been tracing them this half hour back. Uckridge groaned. Scoundrels! Demons! Beale went off. Milly old girl, said Uckridge, adjusting the ginger beer wire behind his ears and hoisting up his grey flannel trousers, which showed an inclination to sag. You'd better go indoors. Yes, yes, Lord something me, but no idea how to pronounce it. Yes, I'm right there with you, Magpie. You'd better go indoors. I propose to speak pretty chattily to these blighters. In the heat of the moment, 1 or 2 my expressions might occur to me which you would not like, would hamper me, your being here. Mrs. Uckridge went into the house, and the vanguard of the audience began to come onto the lawn. Some of them looked flushed and dishevelled. I have a suspicion that Beale had shaken sobriety into them. Charlie, I noticed, had a black eye. They assembled on the lawn in the moonlight, and Uckridge, with his cap well over his eyes and his mackintosh hanging round him like a Roman toga, surveyed them sternly and began his speech. You scoundrels, you blighters, you worms, you weeds! I always like to think of Stanley Featherstone. I'm going to say Featherstone. Uckridge, as I saw him at that moment. There have been times during a friendship of many years when his conduct did not recommend itself to me. It has sometimes happened that I have seen flaws in him, But on this occasion he was at his best. He was eloquent. He dominated his audience. Long before he had finished, I was feeling relieved that he had thought of sending Mrs. Uckridge indoors when he did, and Beale was hanging on his words with a look in his eyes which I had never seen there before, a look of reverence, almost of awe, the look of a disciple who listens to a master. He poured scorn upon his hearers, and they quailed. He flung invective at them, and they wilted. Strange oaths, learned among strange men on cattle ships, or gleaned on the waterfronts of Buenos Aires and San Francisco, slid onto the stream of his speech. It was hard, he said in part. It was, upon his Sam, a little hard that a gentleman, moreover, who had done so much to stimulate local trade, with large orders and what not, could not run up to London for 5 minutes on business without having his private grounds turned upside down by a gang of cattle-ship adjectived San Francisco substantives, who behaved as if the whole of the Buenos Aires phrased place belonged to them. He intended to do well by them. He had meant to continue putting business their way, expanding their trade. But would he, after what had occurred, not buy a jugful? As soon as ever the sun had risen and another day begun, their miserable accounts should be paid in full, and their connection with him cut off. Afterwards, it was probable that he would institute legal proceedings against them in the manner of trespass and wholesale damage to property. And if they didn't all end their infernal days in some dashed prison, they might consider themselves uncommonly lucky. And if they didn't make themselves scarce and considerably under 2 ticks, he proposed to see what could be done with Beale's shotgun. Beale here withdrew with a pleased expression to fetch the weapon. He was sick of them. They were blighters, creatures that it would be fulsome flattery to describe as human beings. He would call them skunks, only he did not see what the skunks had done to be compared with them. And now they might go quick. I've never encountered the phrase "my Sam" before either, and yes, I also think of Sam from Lord of the Rings. Um, okay, so we were quiet at the farm that night. Uckridge sat like Marius among the ruins of Carthage and refused to speak. Eventually, he took Bob with him and went for a walk. Half an hour later, I, too, wearied of the scene of desolation. My errant steps took me in the direction of the sea. As I approached, I was aware of a figure standing in the moonlight, gazing silently out over the waters. Beside the figure was a dog. The dark moments of optimistic minds are sacred, and I would no more have ventured to break in on Uckridge's thoughts at that moment than, if I had been a general in the Grand Army, I would have opened conversation with Napoleon during the retreat from Moscow. I was withdrawing as softly as I could when my foot grated upon the shingle. Uckridge turned. "Hello, Garney." "Hello, old man," I murmured in a bedside voice. He came toward me, Bob trotting at his heels, and as he came, I saw with astonishment that his mien was calm, even cheerful. I should have known my Uckridge better than to be astonished. It cannot keep a good man down, and already Stanley Featherstone Uckridge was himself again. His eyes sparkled buoyantly behind their pince-nez. "Garny, old horse, I've been thinking. Got an idea. The idea of a lifetime. The best ever, upon my Sam. I'm going to start a duck farm. Oh, God." "A duck farm?" "A duck farm, laddie, and then run it without water. My theory is, you see, that ducks get thin by taking exercise and swimming about all over the place. So that if you kept them always on land, they'd get jolly fat in about half the time, and no trouble and expense. See? What? Not a flaw in it, old horse. I've thought the whole thing out." He took my arm affectionately. "Now, listen. We'll say that the profits of the first year, at a conservative estimate, and that is the end. this is uh okay. It basically I was not expecting it to end quite that quickly. Um, because I was not expecting quite so many pages of licensing from Project Gutenberg. But that is what passes for a happy ending. Presumably, Garni and Phyllis, Garni and Phyllis get married, one would assume, and uh, lovely old Uckridge continues with his harebrained schemes. All right, so anyway, I am happy that I'm happy to have read this. This has been fun. I should probably have done an initial reading before I attempted reading it out loud. Especially so I could be a little bit a little bit less awkward over some of the sentences, and also to forewarn about the occasional uh, attitude or vintage word usage. But anyway, thank you very much for hanging out with me and for for uh, for dealing with my reading. It is very much appreciated. I have had fun doing this reading. I would like trying to be hard on yourself. That's easier said than done. Because you know, perfection is expected from no one else except oneself, because that anything less is unacceptable. But that's another story. Speaking of other stories, I will probably start another book from Project Gutenberg, starting next week. I'm hoping. I was going to put well, basically, I have in the Discord in my channel a little thing for voting. At the moment, I was thinking the options are more Woodhouse, something by Edgar Allan Poe, uh, vintage ghost stories, the Decameron, Orlando Furioso, which I read at university, and also Mandragola, which is a slightly it's a play by Niccolo Machiavelli, the same person who wrote The Prince, and he wrote a lot of raunchy jokes in there. They're about the equivalent of Shakespearean raunchy jokes, though, so you kind of have to be paying attention to actually get them. And also open to other options. But if Magpie, I know obviously you are already in the Discord, but should anyone actually watch the VOD, here is a linked invitation to the Discord. You can join and help tell me what to start reading next. So that is about it. It is, oh, good grief, it is 10 o'clock now. Um, my time at least. So, thank you very much. I am going to try to get ready for bed in the morning. Uh, bed in the morning. Apparently I no longer brain at this point in time. Thank you so much. Take care, and I will see you hopefully. I do plan to return to Arcade Spirits tomorrow. Probably about 5:15, 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. That is the plan, at least. So I hope to see you there. If not there, then see you around soon. Thanks, Magpie, and anybody who's lurking, and anyone on the VOD. Thank you. And where is my end screen? There we go. Thanks. Bye bye. Take care.